Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant is Ella Washington. She joins me to speak about her time fostering a child, a very disturbed child, who identified into the trans identity for a couple years and then identified out of it. A lot of different competing conditions within this young man. Ella gives a very deep, heavy account of walking somebody through not just the trans identity, but through teenage life. I think this is a very valuable conversation, a bit of a slow burn, admittedly. It was a 2.5-hour conversation, and I cut it down to 1 hour and about 15 minutes. So if you are watching it, you might notice more cuts than usual. If you are just listening, I hope you don't notice anything at all. So without further ado, here is Ella Washington. How long you been in that area, or in Oregon?
Well, in this area since about 2010.
Okay.
Actually, it's all part of the story. It's all wrapped up together.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, so, what's the thesis then?
Well, the thesis, I would say, is that parents of kids who begin identifying as transgender, seemingly with the ROGD, rapid onset gender dysphoria type, we're not transphobes. And, we don't hate our kids, we don't reject our kids. And a lot of the things that people say are happening, that they say are not happening in terms of like instant medicalization or, hug box type affirmations, those are happening.
Okay. Yeah.
And, and so I wanted to share my experience with this kid, because it's funny, he's one of 5. And if his next younger brother had been the one to say that he was transgender identified, I probably would have went along. Just because of who his younger brother is versus who he is.
Okay. A more effeminate?
Yeah, I mean, when he was a little kid and I was trying to give him swimming lessons, his hair was getting in his eyes, and so I gave him a haircut, and he started to cry and just, I want beautiful hair like mom's. And this was a kid that fought over jewelry with his sister. And this was a kid who, when I was packing his night, to-go bags, I found makeup in his go bags. He wasn't the one that ended up IDing as trans.
Okay. And when did the young man in question, could we give him a signifier just so it's easy to...
Sure. So I will use his trans ID name, okay, which he doesn't use anymore, and which is not related to any of his birth names or anything like that. So he called himself Sandy.
Okay.
And
how old was Sandy when you became aware of his identification?
Sure. Sandy was about 6 months after he turned 13.
Okay. And what year is this?
Would have been 2013.
Oh, okay. All right. So this is before things got really out in the open with the trans phenomenon. Yeah.
Yeah. And but when I met the kids, Sandy was 6 going on 7. And when I met the kids, it was sort of a fling with their dad. Wasn't intended to stick around, but did end up doing so because their dad had a huge psychotic break. He has bipolar disorder, schizoaffective disorder, and when he was finally picked up for his Social Security approval, He's on full disability for it. He's very ill.
Okay.
He went off of his medication and started spending like mad. So he had a big episode, and I ended up sticking around.
Okay.
And became a stepmommy to these kids.
All 5 or?
To all 5 of the kids. Now, because of his illness, their mom had moved all of the kids about 150 miles south of where we were. We were in Olympia, where I was going to school. And his 5 kids and his ex-wife were 150 miles south in Portland.
Yeah.
Sort of protect them, protect her. I didn't know it. But the first time I got to know the kids was after, I don't know, 3 or 4 months of us dating. And he was already starting to be a little weird, but his ex-wife dropped the kids off for a week in the summer. And they stayed with us. And I got to know this little boy because he was all up in my business. He was nonstop running around the house, couldn't be satisfied with any activity. No game, no coloring book, no nothing, just running around, being up in everybody's business, climbing all over everything, hitting people, like starting fights randomly. Like none of the neighborhood kids wanted to be with him because he was so aggressive and just up in everyone's face.
Okay.
He was constantly beating up his youngest brother, the one who I mentioned was sort of effeminate.
Yeah.
That kid was always having bloody noses because of how his brother would beat him up. They tormented the cat.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Where is he in the birth order?
He is the second youngest of these 5.
Okay.
So these kids were dropped off with us for a week. And on the last day, everybody's sick of everybody because we're in a 1-bedroom apartment, by the way, with 5 kids.
Okay. Trial by fire.
Yeah. About an hour after the appointed time, the kids come and say, "Hey, has Mom forgotten about us?" I'm like, "Well, I haven't heard from her. I'm sorry. I assume she's on her way." About another hour goes by and we get a call from her. And she says, "I'm going to stay another week in Las Vegas." So the kids stay with us for another week. And this kind of was my first indication of the type of neglectful parenting that these kids were subject to. The first time I got them into a bath, I was shocked that I could not see the bottom of the bathtub after they left such dirty bath water individually. Do you kids never ever bathe? Sandy had really close cropped hair, probably, about my length here. And it was patchy, like there was hair falling out in little bits. His mom said when she dropped him off, "Oh, it's eczema, and I don't have his medication. It was in a purse that got stolen." Whatever. After 2 weeks of having the kids and making sure they were bathed regularly, I could see the hair was starting to come back in. It was just like scalp fungus.
Yeah.
So they were severely neglected kids. Every time these kids were picked up, I would sob for about an hour, knowing that they were going back to the place where, nobody was watching to make sure that they didn't get beat up by their elders or making sure that they, had a bath time. I learned that it was customary for them just to, when they were tired, just to crawl up asleep. Like they didn't have a bedtime. They would just go off to bed whenever they felt like it.
Okay.
Their mom, I learned, was alcoholic. And their dad, severely mentally ill. And It felt like, I had chosen when I was a teenager never to have a kid, but to foster one eventually. I figured that would be my path. And then when these kids landed in my lap and they were feral and needed a grounded adult, I figured, here I go. And I did like their dad. I loved him. I did love him. When he wasn't ill and when he wasn't abusing alcohol and when he was taking care of himself, he was a good dad and a good partner and lots of fun. But those times just got fewer and fewer.
Yeah.
As I learned, during his first illness, I went to a class that's a 12-week class. You spend 12 Saturdays, full days, with the National Alliance for Mental Illness. It's called Family to Family. And they teach you everything about serious mental illness. And it's for partners, siblings, parents, grandparents, whatever, of people with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, etc. And yeah, they go from, like what causes the illness to what medications do and somewhat how we think they work, to, how often you can expect an episode to happen, to what you can do for lifestyle changes to help your loved one, how to set good boundaries with someone who has mental illness, just what symptoms look like, what a prodrome looks like, what it looks like when they're fully in an episode, just top to bottom. Mm-hmm. And when I went through this class, I started recognizing this little kid, Sandy, in so much of this.
Okay.
And I started talking to their dad's mom, their grandma, who is also in town. And she has a pretty good recollection because she kept diaries daily for, like decades. And she actually wrote a book about her son's first foray into mental illness and everything that happened with him. He was a gutter punk in Olympia in the early 90s and was in with the meth crowd, running scams at the downtown Shell station for meth money. And that's actually how he met the kids' mom. But so he had been through it a couple of times before, and so had she. And she told me about what kind of kid he was. And he was exactly the same.
As Sandy.
Like, he was into petty criminal mischief, like making homemade M80s and blowing them up in the backyard.
Oh, jeez.
When the backyard abuts a middle school.
Oh, no. Breaking
and entering into neighbors' houses, just for petty thrills, not to steal anything, but just to like creep around and whatever. And Sandy was a troubled kid too. When he was in the second grade, about the summer or the year after we were introduced, he was told by the school that he could not come back until his mom got him into mental health treatment.
Okay.
But simultaneously, to add another variable into this show, right? Kiddo is diagnosed with type 1 diabetes.
Oh.
So it came to a point where their dad and I, we decided that we would try to move closer to them. And I found, I had graduated from college and lost my job in the housing crash. So we figured it was time, let's just move down south. And I found an AmeriCorps position actually down here, and served in this area, developing educational programs for the community center in low-income housing.
So you are a social worker outside of the house and a social worker inside of the house. You are doing social work 24/7.
I'm doing social work.
Yeah.
My degree at Evergreen was not social work. I was economics and pre-law.
Oh.
I took 4 quarters of programs of pre-law and 4, I would say, of hardcore economics. That was my jam.
Yeah. Okay.
And some business management and nonprofit management.
Okay.
So the AmeriCorps position was a stepping stone into management for me, in my mind.
Okay. Yeah.
I really that's who I am. My purpose in the world is, I want my life to have been a gift to the future. And that's how I was going to do it. And I say was, and I'll get to that too. Anyhow, into this AmeriCorps position and doing all of this, learning and starting to understand the bigger picture about this kiddo and his family, and continuing to talk with their grandma who was in contact with their mom, it's still friendly. We decided that we were going to kidnap the kids.
Are you sure you want to say that out loud to the internet?
It wasn't necessarily kidnapping. It's his own kids.
Okay.
I mean, we were rescuing them because what they were describing was a household with no food in the cupboards. The teachers were talking about the youngest kid hoarding food from the garbage at school, talking about not coming to school with socks or underwear. The kids would talk about how they played with Sandy's used syringes, that they weren't being disposed of properly. They talked about mom had zombie mode, where they could ask her for anything and she would say yes. Mom was blacked out. So with this kid having such serious behavioral problems and having a serious illness, diabetes, we decided to rescue him. So after a weekend visit, we didn't give the youngest 2 back. It was going to be the youngest 3, but the middle one decided not to come with us that weekend. So the youngest 2 it was, and we kept them. We are on the other side of the border, by the way. So this triggered the divorce. They were not actually divorced.
Oh, did you just learn about that then, or?
No.
Okay, well, there we go. At least you were a little prepared, but...
I was a little prepared, but this triggered the divorce because they didn't actually have an official parenting plan or
custody
arrangement, anything. It was basically just de facto custody. She had just taken the kids, like she had kidnapped the kids originally, and took them to Oregon. So this triggered this whole thing, and during the divorce, we learned that she was pregnant with her boyfriend's kid. So now there's kid number 6 coming on board. And things were still very rocky with Sandy because he had gone through a variety of diagnoses with the professionals, like ranging from ADHD to PTSD to complex PTSD to, ODD, oppositional defiant disorder, Tourette's. One of his major things was uncontrollable beatboxing. Like he just couldn't like all the time.
That's kind of cool. That's kind of a gift. Kind of.
But, you know, there were also like random that.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah.
So they started to try him on medications. And they tried him on, like, it was a blood pressure medication that they say was supposed to reduce hyperactivity, but all it made him do was fall asleep in the shower. So I was like, that's a safety problem. We're not doing that. They put him on Strattera, and Strattera, which is one of these methamphetamine variations. It's like Ritalin, but I think it's like a longer acting. It's got holes drilled in it. That one made him feel like he was Superman. And he was on a play structure and jumped from one structure to another that was like no rational thinking person would, and he broke his arm. So that was kind of a wake-up call for everybody. And I was like, you guys, I've been telling you all along, he's like his dad. Give him his dad's medications. So they finally gave him a mood stabilizer. And it was like a light switch. The aggression went away. I mean, he had been like attacking teachers, biting them, cutting other kids' hair in classrooms. He, at one point, had thrown a temper tantrum and escaped the school and rolled under a school bus. Yeah. They brought him back into the school. He stripped naked and headbutted a glass display case. Kid was out of freaking control.
Wow.
They gave him the mood stabilizer and it turned off. It was magic. What came out was depression after the mania was gone. His dad is a rapid cycler. His dad is, without medication, he is up at 4 a.m, giggling like the Joker, and then at sundown, rocking himself in a fetal position on the bathroom floor, crying about wanting to die. His dad is really, when he's not medicated, he's bad. And the kid ended up bad too, with depression. So they finally agreed to medicate him for that as well. He ended up on the exact same medication regimen as his dad, and it worked. It was great. And that was just slightly, between 10 and 13, those ages that happened, and he much improved. He was finally back in a regular social setting in school for part of the day. He was finally, actually making progress on some of his IEP goals. It was
What's
great.
an IEP goal?
An IEP is an individual education plan that a kid on special education has adjusted every year. And it's got things like will self-soothe 80% of the time when upset, will get teachers' attention appropriately 80% of the time, whatever. And his goals were really, really low until maybe like the 7th grade.
Okay.
And when he finally started to get better. And at this point, like, we had gone through therapists, psychiatrists, medication, we'd got him labs, like with the addition of the mood stabilizer, he was now getting quarterly blood draws to make sure everything was okay with his kidney function. His diabetes control was not great at all. For folks who are familiar with the scale of A1C, 6 is probably ideal, and 10 is like danger zone, about to die, and he was consistently an 8 or 9.
Okay.
So that wasn't really great, but it was getting better as he was more able to control his moods. He was also able to control food cravings and, not lie as much, because that had been a big problem. Like, he was never trusted to tell the truth about anything. With this kid, with Sandy, you always had to verify what was going down. Like, ask another kid who was there and watching, because he would always change the story to make himself the hero, or to at least absolve himself of error. Mm-hmm. And when he started to get better, though, his mom started to allow him to have internet access unsupervised.
Okay.
And his interests develop that he discovers he's a brony.
Okay. So could you elaborate just a bit on that for anybody who's not aware of the brony sensation that has swept the nation?
Yeah, so he discovers that he is a fan of the new My Little Pony series. And he loves Friendship is Magic. And, I don't know what else to say about it. Like, they're little ponies that when I was a little girl, they were aimed at me. Yeah. And that was a reboot, but that particular internet community is actually stocked with men, full-grown men of a variety of ages, and unsupervised time at the internet, interacting with a cartoon that's aimed at children, but possessed with men. You don't know who he's starting to contact. You don't know who is starting to communicate with him and shape his worldview, because he is so malleable. And in all of this, the malleability is absolutely a point. I mean, developmental delay has been a thread throughout his lifetime.
Okay.
So,
would you say that at this point in time, and I think this is probably 10 or 11, he's pretty verbally precocious, but emotionally underdeveloped? Yes. Okay. Which is absolutely the worst combination for an internet upbringing.
Absolutely. He was very verbally precocious. And I would say, he was the one that was picking up words that his dad and I used to bring them back home to his mother's household. And she would be very impressed with his usage of the words. Yeah. The other kids weren't doing so as much as him. Mm-hmm. So I would say, him more than the others even. He discovers bronies. He discovers the furry community. For him, it's very innocent and they're all plushies, just, people dressing as plushies, and they just like to be fun and, just do fun things. And, they skip around town wearing costumes. It's all very fun and light and innocent. And I knew somewhat about the darker side of the furry community because I had gotten Bizarre magazine when I was a teen. And they reported on that. And so I knew kind of like the more adult sexual side of it. But I didn't think there was like a fun, light side that kids should be participating in. But then there was a convention that came to town. And it was like one of these anime conventions, except it was like included costumed people. Yeah. And we went to the area near the convention center, and there was a big park where all the kids were coming out of the convention, and, they were all costumed and fun and being cool and free and whatever. And we're like, okay, go join them, whatever, kid, because he'd always had problems making friends of peers. Yeah. And I always wanted to encourage opportunities for him to mix and mingle, and it seemed to fit the bill because they welcomed him in, and it was kind of creepy. They all had a circle, and they were like, one of us, one of us, one of us. I was like, well, that's what I wanted, was him to find some people where he could be one of us. Yeah. But this is kind of a creepy way to do it. Okay, whatever. So I kind of talked to him about it. And one thing I got to emphasize in all of this is that at no point was our relationship ever adversarial. Even though he was such a troubled kid, even though, we had to deal with these behavioral problems, I had found a way of dealing with them. I had found the parenting with love and logic system, which is basically like redirection or, sharing control through choices, like every little thing. Do you want strawberry? Do you want orange? Do you want chocolate or vanilla? Like building up the kids' like power, like giving them as much individual power as you possibly can, so that when the circumstances arise where you are concerned for their safety or you have other, serious developmental concerns, you can pull the plug and say no without them going, you always say no to everything. Mm-hmm. Like it sort of just holds back your power for the time when you really need it. And another basis of that type of parenting relationship is just, talking it out and giving space to be wrong. So anyway, we talked about this, and this opened up our dialogue, but he hadn't really come out as trans yet. It was maybe a couple months after that he went to his dad and I and told us that he had already come out to his mom and now stepdad or steppartner or whatever he is, other parental unit, and his teachers and his endocrinologist, and that they wanted to start puberty blockers, and that he was now going by a new name.
How old is he?
13.
Okay.
So just almost out of 8th grade. When his endocrinologist offered puberty blockers right out of the gate, his dad and I put our foot down and said no. And this was for the very base reason that, number one, his diabetes was not in control. Number two, we didn't know what his behavioral, issues were. We were still sorting out the meds. It was still early in his mood stabilizer road there. And we asked her flat out, are there any studies about how a puberty blocker impacts diabetes? If the answer is no, then the answer is no.
Why would I just don't understand why a professional would rush a treatment without having like a solid basis of why.
I don't know. And that's the thing, like she had known this kid since he was diagnosed at age 8. She had been the consistent physician, seeing him in the beginning every 2 months and then every 3 months thereafter. She knew like he was a kid that brought in bionicles to every appointment and was like making gunny shoot sounds and like, he wasn't feminine in his day-to-day at all. He refused hygiene. He refused to brush his hair, like he wasn't into long nails. He wasn't into anything like that. And why she rushed into treatment, I can only wonder. And I can only wonder because in the end of all of this, after she offered him cross-sex hormones, when he turned 16-ish, he was like on the cusp of 16, she said, well, is it time for estrogen yet? That's when I went home and found the other pediatric endocrinologist in our metro area and got him into the pipeline to get away from this person.
Wow. And
I called the hospital patient ombuds and wrote emails and asked them how I need a letter from her saying how this aligns with standards of care for this person. We have all of these confounding variables in their life, trauma, poverty, mental illness. They basically tick every single box in the adverse childhood experience survey, except for maybe sexual abuse. They tick every single box. How is this treatment ethical? And I want a letter. And the response I received over the phone was, standards of care are not binding. So we found another endocrinologist, and she agreed that he was never a candidate for either of those treatments, and that it never should have been broached. I had tried to get a care team together. Like, I tried to get everybody, the psychologist, the psychiatrist, the endocrinologist, the school nurse, the mom, the dad, the stepdad, the everybody in the room, to talk about this and maybe try to tease out what was going on. And all I heard back was, we don't want to poke and prod at this poor trans kid.
So that trans identification within the medical field shut off any avenue of complex, nuanced investigation of all the entirety of this human being was collapsed and then neatly boxed away in this trans identity.
Absolutely. And I need to reiterate to you that they believed him about nothing else. He wasn't allowed to walk to the store by himself at age 14. He was not believed about whether or not he ate breakfast that morning. But his trans identification, despite all of these other confounding factors, and despite the history of who he had been as a younger person, the same teacher he had had actually since like 5th grade, she had moved up in grades to be kind of with a cohort of special education students. So she knew him for a long time. And immediately upon him coming out, the next day she brought in a whole bag of her used clothes for him. She's a late 20-something, petite, somewhat. And he is, at 13 years old, pretty skinny. His dad's a skinny dude, struggles to put on muscle, never keeps fat. And it included, lingerie. And that was weird. And he started wearing that right away. He started going by his new name right away. Me, I was like, I thought we were really close, frankly. Every summer that when he was growing up, he would stay at our house, like basically the entire summer. Mom, would give him up as much as she could.
Yeah.
And because of that, I thought I knew him pretty well. And I was kind of shocked. So we went and I was like, can we just go talk about this? So we had a nice little heart-to-heart. I was like, this is pretty shocking, and I'll call you your new name and I'll whatever. But, having known you for this long, and having our history, it's really hard for me to call you she, her. It's going to be hard for me to do that, so I'm going to probably slip up. It might be easier if I call you they, because I know how to use, indirect third-person pronouns. I'm fine with that. So is that cool with you? And he said, yeah. That's fine. We can do that. Now, this history that I allude to with us is that one of the symptoms of bipolar disorder is hypersexuality. And he had been sexually invasive to me when he was a younger kid. And I try not to remember that when we go about our day-to-day relationship. Like, that is the very, very back of my brain. Don't even think about that. I know it was illness expressing itself. I know it was not him and not his intent to be like that toward me. But there was a time when he was a young kiddo, like I couldn't take him swimming because he would try to pull my top off, or he would try to sneak into the locker room to watch me undress. His dad caught him trying to break into the bathroom when I was showering. So knowing that, it just kind of made me a little uncomfortable to call him she, her. So I settled on they, them, and he seemed okay with it, and that was fine. And he still lived with his mom and her partner, and so they moved him into his sister's bedroom. He is, like I said, one of 5 kids. There are 4 boys and 1 girl. So the sister comes and confides into me after Sandy has been has been about a month or so in her bedroom, that she's really disturbed by his behavior, and it just keeps going on, and she's talked to her mom about it, and her mom won't do anything, and she really doesn't like it. I'm like, that's not cool. We decide as a collective to ask his mom if he can come and live with us, finally. It'd be kind of a break between middle school and high school. Like if he wants to start his new identity at a new school, he can do that. It's going to be, a place where it will take the pressure off of him, to live up to his older siblings. He can just sort of, and he can have the 2-on-1 sort of parental attention that all of his conditions sort of require. And we agreed to this with certain caveats. Caveats being, if Jay and I broke up again, if their dad and I broke up again for whatever reason, that Sandy would stay with me and continue to go to school. And I agreed to this because I personally had been transferred through several high schools and knew the hell of it, knew the administrative hell of doing that. And I wanted him to have stability. I wanted him to have continuity. And so we all agreed to that. That was great. He came to live with us. We used his pronouns. He could dress however he wanted. And, and actually, I had no problem playing along. And the way that I played along was actually to enforce feminine social conventions on him. So, he wanted to wear a sheer shirt out of the house. Like, no, girls don't do that. You put on a camisole underneath that. You don't wear that sheer shirt just by itself. Or, you need to close your legs when you're wearing that dress. No, a little bit more. No, all the way, knees together. You can't be climbing that. You can't be climbing that stuff wearing a dress. That sort of stuff. And he really didn't like that. But that was all the stuff that I had been subject to as a little girl. Like the very first feminine social convention that I had been introduced to was modesty. So if he's going to be feminine, let's be feminine.
There's a lot of people that push against that, but that's a huge conversation. But I can see how tactically that's a very, I don't want to say cunning in a negative sense, but it's a very smart decision.
I mean, think about it. Developmentally, the women who wear sheer shirts or whatever, they're at the stage where they're rebelling against the modesty that's been ingrained in them their whole lives. They've already, that's a door that they're shutting. They're not just entering into this world of flaunting their assets. Okay. That's not what womanhood is about, right? When they flaunt their assets, it's supposed to be empowering, whatever. What is it empowering from? So, in order for my kid to experience sheer whatevers as more than just a, expression of trying to be sexual in public, if it's going to be the feminine meaning of wearing that sheer stuff, then he should have a sense of modesty to rebel against.
Okay.
And I got to say, throughout all of this as well, another focus of mine has just been, the way out is through. Learning is everything. Reading books, going to classes, trying to integrate this into a systemic view of, a systemic analysis of what's going on in the world and in my life and in my kids' life. So we were reading a lot of books too at this time about trans ID teens. I think we read one called Magenta. I read a book by Nora Vincent about, she transitioned to live as a man for a year or whatever. So I read in books about his bipolar disorder. I read in books about the sociology of poverty, family structures are different, oral culture versus written culture is different, just all these different things, trying to give him an understanding. And he really did get it. Even though his emotional expression was kind of stunted, his cognitive function, he was like, oh, I see. These are all things that I have been exposed to. Mm-hmm. These are all possibly, these ways that I behave are possibly coping mechanisms for all of these things in my life that have happened. And we, talked about just basic, social role observations. There are equal number of stalls in the men's bathroom to the women's bathroom at the movie theater. What do men do? They pee and they poop. What do women do? They pee, they poop, they have menstruation, they have leaky boobs, they toilet kids, they sometimes miscarry, they hide from predators, they are equal number stalls equal? So, I would ask him things like that. Or, when he'd go back to his mom's house for the holidays, he'd come back and talk about events going on in the holidays. And I'd ask him, just observe, think back in your mind on Thanksgiving Day. Where are the dudes? They're in the living room watching football? Or they're back in brother's room LAN gaming? Where are the girls? They're all in the kitchen. Where are you? I'm LAN gaming. But anyway, sophomore year was a big growth year. And this was when I did a lot more of the probing, why and what and how, and, when it came to his ideas about what it meant to be a woman. Why do you want to be one? What is it that is attractive about it? And he had some strange ideas about what being a woman was, I felt. One of his ideas was that it was life on easy mode. He saw chivalry. He saw, his mom is kind of a submissive wife. She's a traditionalist Christian now, and the husband takes care of business, and wife has a really small domain that she has to take care of, and her chores are really mundane, and she can work or not. And, she doesn't have kids. It's basically sitting around eating bonbons and, making sure dinner is ready. And, microwaves are great. So making dinner is not that hard. And female life is just awesome. So that's when I was like, okay, buddy, we need to talk about, you need to open your eyes and look around. Who gets the family together and to do things how do holidays and birthdays happen? What, who gets you to your appointments? Who makes your appointments? That sort of thing. Like, let's have a more eyes open approach about what it means to be a woman. And also what it means to be a man. Because, I think that a lot of the stereotypes that he had internalized were also pretty harmful. Like, the machismo and denigration of women, that he thought he was expected to participate in, or, thinking that he was going to have to be the breadwinner or whatever, that was his destiny. And just trying to show him, we can step outside of these roles. This is not anything fixed in society, and you may perceive that it is easier in life for people who do fit within those roles very neatly, but you will also find that people who give us amazing contributions to the world step outside of those roles. That sophomore year was fun. A lot more of his personality continued to come out. Turns out he's a really funny person, really, kind of like outgoing, happy, whatever. I don't know if it was an act. I didn't think it was. He seemed like that was genuinely him. His diabetes got better. The A1C went down to between 6 and 7. And I noticed that his energy, his alertness, just his ability to participate in school got a whole lot better. His valproate levels, that's his medicine for his mood stabilizer, those levels were consistently good now. Because I'd instituted programs for him where he could organize his medicines and have everything laid out and in one place, and he could see, like, if it's still there, I didn't take it. So, using med minders and pre-filled syringes and, really strict note taking and, teaching him organizational skills. And he seemed to be doing really great sophomore year. Between sophomore and junior year, I signed him up for a summer school class, career exploration. Couple credits, no risk. Like, if you pass, you get extra credits. If you fail, nothing happens. It's just like a way to keep him in a routine, essentially, while I had to work and he had a summer vacation. And there were surveys, like personality surveys and interest surveys and whatnot in this. And from reviewing all of these surveys, I learned something really interesting. And his responses to questions like, if you came across a crowd of people beating someone up, what would you do? And it was multiple choice, like, go tell someone, try to break up the fight, join in the fight, get between the assaulters and the victim, that sort of thing. He would join in. Most of his answers to these questions indicated that he did not have an internal locus of control, that he really gave that to the crowd. Like, he was a go-along person and was very much not into examining why they were doing what they were doing, but that it was easier just to fit in and not think about it for him.
Okay.
That was kind of a disturbing discovery for me. And it really made me work a lot harder to try and develop that internal sort of control. Like, we need to develop what is your goal? What do you want to make of your life? Not necessarily, what career you want or, whatever, but we want to examine, like, what does a happy life look like for you? And this is also important because going with the crowd at the time for him was supporting Donald Trump.
Oh, he fell on that side.
He did.
In Portland.
In Portland.
That's risky.
Well, turns out a lot of the online forums that he was taking part in were very conservative.
Conserva furries.
There was a significant brony Nazi overlap.
Oh, no.
And I urge you to look into that.
Oh, maybe I don't want to. I'm having visions of stampedes through the streets.
It has been documented
Okay.
in other places.
Yeah.
But there is a significant Nazi brony furry overlap.
Okay.
And there was also a really excellent opinion piece published in the New York Times. This was also about the time that Caitlyn Jenner came out. Call me Kate. And when Caitlyn Jenner came out, there was an article in the New York Times. I think it was called "What Makes a Woman," but it was by a female author. And she went through and she was like, she laid out basically all of the gender critical arguments, like, even if I stop shaving, I'm still a woman. Even if I take a masculine career, I'm still a woman. All of these things. And I read it to the kid. And I read all of the 700 responses, which were mostly on the same side. Explaining all these women are talking about their women experience and how their body has influenced that, and how it has limited their choices through life, and how it has impacted just what direction they went, whether they ended up rich or poor was affected by the fact that they were a woman. And that really got him to thinking a little bit more. The election happened, and I was very sad, and he was very sad. And so we kind of huddled in, but then we heard about the Women's March, and we both decided to go. So we went to the Women's March in Portland together. And that was an interesting experience. He got to see a bunch of signage about, really these bodily concerns are very serious to women. And there were a lot of trans activists in the crowd as well, with signage that was very negative toward women and toward, centering women's bodily experience. And he observed that was kind of stupid. And then we together heard the saga of Rebecca Brewis, who had been an organizer of the Women's March here in Portland, who is a transgender ex-felon who made off with about $15,000 from the organizing committee. And he was like, well, there's dishonesty on top of dishonesty. And so it wasn't long after that we had his regular IEP meeting for the school year. Always happens in that sort of January, February area. And that's when he said to the assembled group of people, we had a full room with the school nurse, the school counselor, his special ed teacher, the school district special ed person, coordinator, his mom, me, his stepdad, and he announced that he was no longer transgender identified. He didn't want they, them pronouns anymore. He was fine, he, him. He's going to keep his name because he'd gotten so used to it, and so had everybody else. But that was the end of it.
Just like that.
That was like that. And continued to be really successful in school that year. Continued to do better and better, but it seemed like every time he had a success, he would get scared of it. We would send him on a trip on public transportation that had, a transfer and a walk to another bus stop and, just a little bit more complex directions. And he did it, and we celebrated it. And the next time he would get on the bus and forget that he was on the bus and just not ever get off. Or, we would celebrate him independently doing a school project. And then the next similar school project he had to do, he would freeze and I don't know where to start, and just have emotional meltdowns over how intimidated he was by the work. And it wouldn't help to say, hey, we did this last time. Here's how we did it. We broke it down step by step. We didn't eat the elephant in one bite. That didn't help. And so the next summer, I again enrolled him in the enrichment class. And this time it was fashion, because he was interested in that. He still, he's like, I want to develop my own personal style. I want to know like how colors work together when in your clothes and stuff. Cool. So I signed him up for a fashion class. And he had a lot of problems in there. He was self-isolating, but telling me, like, the teacher would call me and tell me that he was going into another room to curl up in a corner and suck his thumb. He would tell me that the other kids didn't want him around. She would tell me that they would try to include him and he would start verbal altercations. He would tell me, they're bullying me. It got to a point where it was kind of stressful for him, but it was a short class, so I made him write it out. I was like, we need you to be in structure. And then the next school year started, his senior year of school started, and he had a suicide attempt. This time it was a serious attempt. During the meltdowns, I guess, from being in that summer class and getting started in senior year of high school, one of the things that he said to me was, I guess you just don't love me right. In terms of, I don't know, maybe my not understanding how he could go from having so much success and doing so well and having, looking forward to post senior year. And because we had, in his IEP, we'd actually made a plan for him to be in an extended high school program. They call like Roadmap to Success or Runway to Success or something like that, where basically they have career support and they help you finish up any classes that you may not have done well in high school, and they offer like internships and interpersonal classes and things like that for special ed kids up until they turn 21. Mm-hmm. So we were going to enroll him in that. So it wasn't like he was looking down the barrel of a gun at the end of high school. He had, another good 3 years runway before we were going to say, hey, we're looking at adulthood here. And then even further after that, my offer was still good until he was 23. So he had a good 5 years, even 6 years at this point, because he hadn't turned 18 yet. But he was just a couple months from turning 18. And he was starting to realize that. It was starting to bear down on him. And he had meltdowns over that. And then he had a serious suicide attempt. And by serious, I mean he got up overnight and injected way too much fast-acting insulin. And that would have surely done it if he hadn't gotten scared and chickened out. And I don't want to say chickened out, that's terrible. If he hadn't gotten scared and started downing sugar to deal with it. And he did eventually wake me up early. He was like, my blood sugar is still going down. I attempted suicide. I need your help. So at that point, I injected him with glucagon, which is a fast-acting reversal agent for insulin, and said, do you want me to drive you to the hospital, or do you need me to call an ambulance? Because I do not countenance suicide attempts. We don't sit around and talk about it. There's no tea and sympathy. You attempt suicide, we're going to the hospital. That's that. Because he had used it as manipulation in the past. He had said things like, if you don't do this for me, I'm going to kill myself. And I'm like, well, let's go to the hospital then. Oh, I don't mean it. But this time he had. And I took him to the hospital. And he had another inpatient stay in the psychiatric ward. And while he had his inpatient stay at the psychiatric ward, I continued to go and visit him, and he continued to talk to me about how he wanted to give up. He was just done with therapy. He's done with school. Therapy wasn't getting him anywhere. He was tired of it. So he's going to drop out of both. And I let him know, I'm sorry, that's my boundary. You had to keep in your therapy and your medical treatment, and you had to stay in school in order to keep living with me, because I'm not your mom. And that was why you were with me, was so that we could get this intense care to make you successful in these things. But if you're giving up, then I'm sorry. And maybe you're right. Maybe I don't love you right. Maybe you need to go back to your biological mom, who maybe knows you better, who maybe, I don't know. It was around that time that book, Far From the Tree, came out, and there were a whole bunch of people on the radio were talking about kids who didn't share a lot of their traits with their parents. Well, he was pretty far from the tree. I mean, he was under my tree. So maybe he needed to go be back with people who were like him. I don't know. So he did. He moved back. As far as I know, he is still desisted. He called me. Well, see, after he moved back, I went and visited him for his 18th birthday. I had already bought his birthday present for him, so I wanted to drop it off. Got him a new pair of shoes. And then I called him up that next summer, and we went and visited for an afternoon, and he seemed okay. And then that fall, he called me and asked if he could come and live with me for a couple of weeks. And I told him, unfortunately, that just doesn't work. You can't come back. I would love to see you for an afternoon. I would love to spend some time, get some lunch or whatever. Love to catch up. I really miss you. But I'm sorry you can't come and live with me. And I haven't heard from him since. I am still in touch with his siblings. Youngest brother is doing well. He's in college remotely, driving a schoolie, or living in a schoolie, going around picking up garbage at national parks. He called me up actually on Mother's Day to thank me and to say that he wouldn't be as successful as he is now if I hadn't been there. And I cried. I'm going to cry. It was so incredible. I mean, I think about the number of times that I had to take that little boy aside and explain to him why his brother was so violent and mean to him, and just explain to him that, he doesn't want to be like this. And when he's like this, it means that he's sick. And you need to come and tell us so that we can help you, so that we can keep you safe, and so that we can help him not do this to you.
Yeah.
And both of the boys had said to me when they were little, I think The youngest was maybe like, he was 8. That's right, because it was around that time that his brother was being born. They told me that they knew that I would keep them safe, that I would not let them do anything to hurt themselves or other people. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's basically like how that went down. So Sandy, as far as I know, is still desisted. They call him now by his male name.
Okay.
But he is still ill, and his father is still ill. And
what?
he does not work. He hasn't graduated high school. He seems, from what they talk about, he seems like he's got sort of a burnout lifestyle right now.
What do you mean by that?
Getting up at 1 p.m., not showering daily or even weekly, smoking a lot of weed.
Can't be good for his mind.
Right. That was one I specifically warned him about, too. That his grandma thinks very strongly that's what triggered his dad's first psychotic break.
Known. So you invested so much of your heart and your soul and your life into this family. Almost like just a donation of charity.
Yeah, kind of.
Why? Why did you keep on doing that? What was telling you to stand up for these kids and this family?
You know, I have a really soft spot in my heart for kids who are abused and neglected. I experienced physical abuse and situational neglect in my own life, and I didn't think any kid should have to have that in their life when they have the opportunity to have at least one caring adult. And why that should be me, I don't know. Maybe convenience because I was there, and because I was such a bleeding heart. But the kid asked me to share. When he was desisting, he asked me to go out on the street corner with a sign, the way that the anti-abortion people did in front of his school, the way that Billboard Chris is doing. And he wanted me to go out and tell the world that kids were being conned into being transgender. And that is why I'm doing this video. That is why I'm here. This is my billboard. And when he asked for that, I taught him the meaning of the word pillory, about the stocks. and I told him that doing so publicly here in this metro area gave me great fear for my personal safety. If I were to do that in front of his school, if I were to do that somewhere else where it was important and attention getting, that I fear that my safety would be in danger. So, I guess that's, other than that, I don't have a why. I want my life to be a gift to the future, and this seems to be one way I can give a gift.
Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing such weight.
Yeah, it is.
Congratulations for reaching the end of the discussion. If you enjoyed it, do be sure to leave a review or a comment or a thumbs up or whatever you need to do to show that glorious algorithm that this is some good stuff. And do be sure to go and check that back catalog, as it is brimming full of fantastic conversations. Links to provide monetary support are down there in the description as well. Have a good night.